The steaming coffee spilled across the pristine, crimson silk shirt, staining the fabric with an ugly, spreading blotch. The heat struck his skin in a sudden wave, yet the man did not flinch. In the sunlit, opulent calm of the golden café, every gaze turned toward him. The soft clink of porcelain and the murmur of conversation died at once, replaced by a thick, uneasy silence. Agent Brennan held the now empty ceramic cup, a cruel, satisfied smile curling across his lips. Beside him stood his partner, Agent Keller, arms folded, radiating the same air of untouchable authority. "That's a lesson for you, boy," Brennan drawled, loud enough for the entire cafe to hear. "You're in the big leagues now. Learn some respect when you're in our neighborhood." They had seen a black man who refused to lower his head, who showed none of the fear they demanded, and they decided to put him in his place. But they had no idea whom they had just attacked. They saw a victim. They had just provoked the most dangerous man they would ever meet. Before we continue, tell us where in the world you're watching from, and subscribe so you can see how the story unfolds. The day had begun with the precision and cleanliness of a perfect surveillance operation. Damon Cross sat at the small marble table, the picture of relaxed wealth. The crimson silk shirt was a deliberate choice, a symbol of casual extravagance that fit the persona of Dante, a high-level financial consultant with a taste for the finer things and clients of flexible morality. His posture was easy, one leg crossed over the other, his gaze drifting lazily across the other patrons. But behind that calm exterior, his mind worked like a supercomputer, processing every detail. He watched the man at the corner table, his primary target, Marcus Hale, who was at that moment explaining the intricacies of offshore accounts to a nervous-looking new client. He noted the exits, the reflections in the polished chrome of the espresso machine, the slight tremor in the waiter's hand that suggested he was new to the job. Everything was data. The bell above the door chimed, and Agents Brennan and Keller walked in. Damon felt a flicker of alertness, but dismissed it as routine. Police presence in this part of the city was common. They came for the free coffee and the chance to feel important among the city's elite. Brennan was thick-set, with a coarse face that seemed permanently frozen in a sneer of contempt. Keller was leaner, younger, with the restless eyes of a man who followed orders eagerly. Both of them projected pure intimidation. Their gazes swept the room, sliding with practiced indifference over the wealthy white patrons before locking onto Damon. He felt the familiar weight of their evaluation and suspicion. He had done nothing more than exist in their field of vision, and that was enough. He ignored them, taking a slow sip of his espresso, the bitter liquid a comforting familiarity. He needed Hale to finish the meeting and hand the encrypted drive to the client. That was the key piece of the entire operation. Years of work, millions of dollars in federal resources, all culminating in this quiet moment. He sensed the agents approaching. The heavy tread of their boots marked a rhythmic beat across the gleaming wooden floor. They stopped at his table, casting long shadows over him. "Can I help you with something, officers?" Damon asked in a soft, calm voice. He did not look up, keeping his eyes fixed on the street beyond the large window. "You're new around here," Brennan stated. It was not a question. "Don't see many like you among the elite." The insult was as vague as it was predictable. Damon finally raised his eyes, meeting Brennan's stare with a calm that seemed to irritate the officer. "I live a few blocks away," he said simply. "Just moved in." Keller gave a low chuckle. "Must be nice. What do you do that lets you afford a place in this neighborhood?" The question was loaded with implication, the automatic assumption that something was wrong. "I work in finance," Damon replied, without changing his tone. The lie was smooth, well-rehearsed. Brennan's smile widened. "Finance, huh? Got some ID? Just want to make sure everything's in order." Damon knew his rights. He knew this was a baseless stop, a classic case of racial profiling. But letting the situation escalate and exposing himself would be catastrophic. He gave a slight, polite nod. "Of course, officer." He reached slowly into the inner pocket of his jacket. As he did, he saw Hale across the room hand the hard drive to his client. The exchange was complete. Mission accomplished. Now he only needed to de-escalate and leave. But Brennan had no interest in de-escalating. He wanted his own mission. When Damon pulled out his wallet, Brennan narrowed his eyes. "You seem a little too calm, friend. A little too sure of yourself." He glanced at the hot coffee pot on the service station beside the table. "People who live here know how to show respect. Maybe you need a little reminder." Before Damon could process the shift, Brennan grabbed the pot, returned to the table, and poured the scalding contents straight onto his chest. The pain was immediate, a searing heat that threatened blisters. But Damon's training took over. He locked every muscle, every nerve. He did not cry out. He did not move. He simply stared at Brennan with dark, unblinking eyes as the officer set the empty cup on the table with a mocking thud. "Welcome to the neighborhood," Brennan spat with contempt. Then he and Keller turned and walked out, leaving Damon sitting in stunned silence, the mission complete, but a cold, methodical rage beginning to crystallize inside him. The main door of the building slammed shut behind him, an unnaturally loud sound in the sudden absolute quiet. Damon Cross stood in the lobby, breathing with calm control that stood in stark contrast to the storm raging within. The pain in his chest was a dull, throbbing fire, a physical anchor to the humiliation he had just endured. But it was the other damage, the invisible kind, that consumed his thoughts. He stripped off the ruined jacket and the crimson silk shirt, the fabric clinging to the burned skin. He let them fall to the polished floor, a dark, disordered stain in the otherwise immaculate entrance. He did not look at the reddened flesh of his chest. The physical wound was insignificant, a nuisance that would heal. The operational damage, however, could be fatal. He moved through the spacious, minimalist living room, the kind of place his alias Dante would own. It was a safe house, one of the most expensive and best equipped in the FBI's inventory, a gilded cage designed for undercover operations. He entered the master bathroom, a cavern of marble and glass, and turned on the cold shower, hissing as the spray hit his chest. The intense cold helped him focus, driving away the lingering heat of the coffee and the burn of his initial fury. He was an FBI agent, not just any agent, but a specialist in long-term infiltration of high-level criminal organizations. He was a ghost, a chameleon, a man trained to suppress every personal instinct in service of the mission. Anger was a luxury. Revenge was a distraction. Yet as the cold water ran over his skin, he could not deny the feeling coiling in his gut. It was something ancient and primitive, something his training had taught him to control, but never to kill. Brennan and Keller had not simply assaulted a citizen with arrogant ignorance. They had endangered a years-long, multi-billion-dollar operation against Marcus Hale's international money laundering network. Hale was the key figure, the financial genius, who washed billions for cartels, rogue states, and terrorist cells. The hard drive exchanged in the café held the key to dismantling his entire network. Damon's role as Dante was to get close to Hale, become an indispensable client, and eventually gain access to his central servers. A public, humiliating altercation with local police could make Hale see Dante as weak, an easy target, someone who attracted unwanted attention. In Hale's world, that was a death sentence. He stepped out of the shower and wrapped a towel around his waist. He entered the secure communications room, hidden behind a false wall in his study. The room stood in stark contrast to the rest of the house, all steel, monitors, and the constant hum of servers. He sat, feeling the cool leather of the chair against his skin, and began to type, his fingers flying across the encrypted keyboard. He needed to assess the damage. He reviewed the exterior security footage from the café, which he had legally accessed weeks earlier. He watched Brennan and Keller leave with smug satisfaction, laughing. He rewound and watched the incident again from the street's perspective. He studied the faces of the other patrons, their surprise quickly turning into a deliberate refusal to get involved. No one intervened. No one called for help. They simply watched. Next, he searched the local police department database, using a restricted access code reserved for interagency cooperation. The files of David Brennan and Michael Keller appeared on the screen. He examined their service records, their decorations, and most importantly, their complaint histories. A grim, familiar pattern repeated itself. Both officers had long records of citizen complaints for excessive force, unlawful stops, and racial discrimination, all of them dismissed. Internal investigations had cleared the officers every time, citing lack of complainant cooperation and insufficient evidence. It was a cover-up, a demonstration of the impenetrable wall that protected men like them. This was not just two corrupt cops. It was a rot within the department, a system designed to protect its own no matter how corrupt. He had to report it. Protocol demanded it. He was a federal agent, and this was an assault. He would file a formal complaint, follow the legal channels, and let the system run its course. He owed himself that much. But as he looked at the long list of dismissed complaints, a cold certainty settled over him. The system would not work. These men were insulated, protected. A formal complaint from a man whose official identity did not exist, whose very presence in the city was classified, would be buried before the ink dried. Still, he would do it. He had to. But even as he began drafting the formal report, another colder, far more personal plan began to take shape in the quiet, calculating depths of his mind. The police station was a world apart from the sun-drenched elegance of the Golden Building. It smelled of stale coffee, disinfectant, and the faint underlying odor of human desperation. The walls were a sickly beige, decorated with faded community notices and wanted posters. It was a place designed to process problems, not solve them. Damon, dressed in a simple but well-tailored gray suit, the uniform of a concerned upper-middle-class citizen, approached the high reception desk protected by a plexiglass partition. The burn on his chest had been treated and now lay hidden beneath an immaculate white shirt. To any observer, he was simply another man with a complaint. The desk sergeant, a heavy-set man named Boone, with a look of boredom, barely glanced up from his crossword. "What can I do for you?" he growled. "I'd like to file a formal complaint against 2 of your officers," Damon said in a quiet, steady voice. That got Boone's attention. He set down his pen and looked Damon up and down, pausing for a moment. It was a look Damon knew well, the weighing, the classifying. "A complaint," Boone repeated dryly, as if the word itself were an inconvenience, "regarding an unprovoked assault this morning at the Gilded Bean on Ocean Avenue." Boone's expression darkened. "Those are serious words." "They were serious actions," Damon replied in an unwavering tone. With a theatrical heavy sigh, Boone slid a multi-page form and a cheap pen through the slot in the plexiglass. "Fill it out. Be detailed. Someone from Internal Affairs will contact you. Maybe." The dismissal was obvious. This was the first barrier: bureaucratic apathy. Damon took the form to a hard plastic chair in the waiting area and filled it out with meticulous precision. He detailed the time, the place, the officers' appearances, their words, and the act itself. He wrote with the impassive clarity of an after-action report, omitting his own internal reactions and sticking strictly to observable facts. He knew any hint of emotion would be used to discredit him, to brand him hysterical or vengeful. When he finished, he returned the form to Sergeant Boone, who took it without a word and dropped it into a wire basket already overflowing with papers. "Someone will call you," Boone said, returning to his puzzle. Damon knew they would not. Not unless he pushed. "I'd like to speak with someone from Internal Affairs now," he said, not moving from the desk. Boone narrowed his eyes. This was not the usual pattern. People were supposed to fill out the form and leave resigned. "They're busy. You'll have to wait for them to review the report. The assault happened just hours ago. The details are still fresh. My clothes are at the dry cleaners being analyzed for evidence." Damon lied with effortless ease. "I imagine Captain Harlan will want to handle the matter while the evidence is still clean." Using the name of the Internal Affairs captain was a calculated move. It told Boone that Damon was not just any civilian. He was someone who had done his homework. Boone hesitated, his bureaucratic certainty wavering. He picked up the phone, muttered something, and after a moment, hung up. "Third floor, room 304, he grumbled, jerking a thumb vaguely. Captain Harlan's office was a step up from the lobby, yet it still carried that air of institutional decay. Harlan himself was a man nearing 50, with a carefully neutral expression, perfected over years of dodging, denying, and burying uncomfortable truths. He listened patiently as Damon recounted the incident, hands folded on the desk. He nodded at the appropriate moments, his face reflecting professional concern. "That's a very disturbing account, sir." He paused, looking at the complaint form. "You didn't leave a name." "I'd prefer to remain anonymous for now," Damon said. "I'm new to the community. I don't want this to be my introduction." Harlan leaned back, and his chair creaked in protest. "I understand, but anonymity makes the investigation difficult. It becomes one man's word against that of 2 decorated officers. There were 24 witnesses," Damon pointed out, "and the cafe's security cameras. Witnesses are often reluctant to get involved, and camera footage can be inconclusive," Harlan said, the words flowing smoothly and rehearsed. "Officers Brennan and Keller have spotless records. It would be highly atypical for them to behave as you've described." Damon felt the wall solidify in front of him. It was not made of brick and mortar. It was built of feigned ignorance, professional courtesy, and a deep institutional instinct for self-preservation. Harlan was not investigating a crime. He was managing a problem, and the easiest way to solve this problem was to make it disappear. "So you're saying nothing will be done?" Damon asked without accusation in his voice. "I'm saying we will investigate thoroughly," Harlan corrected gently. "But you have to understand that we have to support our officers. They risk their lives every day." The meeting was over. Damon stood, giving a slight nod. "Thank you for your time, Captain." He left the office, walked down the drab hallway, and stepped back into the bright afternoon sunlight. He had followed procedure. He had given the system a chance to regulate itself, and as he had known it would, it had failed. The blue wall was not merely silent, it was complicit, and that complicity had given him all the justification he needed. Protocol was finished. It was time for his own internal investigation to begin. Back in the sterile quiet of the communications room, the mask of the aggrieved citizen fell away like a snake's skin. The gray suit was replaced by a simple black t-shirt and cargo pants. The frustration he had felt at the station was gone, replaced by the cold, lucid gaze of a predator. The system had refused to act, so Damon would act for it. He sat before the bank of monitors, the glow reflected in his dark, impassive eyes. If the department would not give him justice, He would systematically destroy the lives of the men who had harmed him. But he would not use fists or bullets. He would use the most powerful weapon in the modern world: information. His fingers moved with dizzying, silent speed across the keyboard. He was no longer limited to the National Crime Information Center or the local police database. He went deeper, using proprietary FBI algorithms and unauthorized access to extract raw, unfiltered data. He ignored the often sanitized official records and went straight to the source servers, financial records, encrypted messaging histories, geolocation data from their personal phones, medical histories, psychological profiles from their academy entrance exams. He was building a complete three-dimensional profile of David Brennan and Michael Keller, stripping them layer by layer until every vulnerability was exposed. The first file he compiled was for Officer David Brennan. The picture that emerged was one of brutal simplicity. Brennan was a classic bully, a man whose self-worth depended directly on his ability to dominate others. His academy psychological profile revealed a latent need for control and difficulty handling any challenge to his authority. He had a spotless official record, but Damon found the digital traces of 17 formal complaints against him, all of them silenced by Captain Harlan. He cross-referenced the names of the complainants. A pattern emerged. They were all men from minority groups, and every incident occurred after the men had talked back or questioned Brennan's authority. He had 2 ex-wives. Both had filed for restraining orders, citing uncontrollable rage, only to mysteriously drop the charges later. Financially, he was stable, but ordinary. His power was not money. It was his pride. His entire identity rested on the image of a tough, untouchable cop. To break Brennan, Damon would have to destroy that image. Next, he focused on Officer Michael Keller. Keller's file was more complex and revealed a man consumed by insecurity. He was a follower, always pairing with more dominant, aggressive officers like Brennan. He had grown up in a working-class neighborhood and deeply envied the wealth he now policed. His psychological profile flagged status anxiety and materialistic tendencies. And then Damon found the key. Keller was living far beyond his means: a mortgage on a house he could not afford, a luxury SUV, a wife who spent freely on designer clothes. His official salary could not support that lifestyle. Damon dug deeper, checking IRS and bank databases. He found it: a series of regular high-interest loans from a known local loan shark, a man nicknamed Sal the Weasel Moretti. Comparing Keller's phone geolocation data with the locations of several underground poker games confirmed it. Keller had a serious gambling addiction. He was drowning in debt and desperate. That was the leverage. Desperation makes a man predictable. It makes him reckless. In the time that followed, Damon did not sleep. He survived on black coffee and the cold thrill of the hunt. He compiled everything into 2 separate, heavily encrypted digital files. Each was a blueprint for the destruction of a man. He had their daily routines, their favorite bars, their passwords, the names of the family members they cared about, their deepest fears and shames. He knew Brennan coached his son's Little League team, trying to project the image of a respectable father. He knew Keller met with his loan shark in the back of a rundown laundry to make his payments. He had everything. This was no longer a simple dispute. It was a matter of accountability. Brennan and Keller had operated for years under the protection of a corrupt system, believing themselves untouchable. They had built their lives on foundations of arrogance and impunity. Damon was about to prove, with surgical precision, that those foundations were made of glass. He closed the files. The plan was fully formed in his mind. He would begin with Keller, set fire to his mountain of debt, and watch as that man's carefully constructed life began to collapse. In chess, the opening move rarely decides the game, but it sets the tone for everything that follows. Damon's first move against Officer Keller was designed to be subtle, undetectable, and absolutely devastating. He was not going to confront Keller or blackmail him. That would be clumsy. Instead, he would use Keller's own desperation as a weapon, drawing him into a trap he would walk into willingly. The target was Keller's gambling addiction. Damon needed to increase the pressure, to turn Keller's manageable debt into a full-blown crisis that would make him erratic and dangerous. From the file, Damon knew Keller frequented a specific online sports betting forum under the username Blue Line. It was a clumsy attempt at anonymity that Damon cracked in minutes. On the forum, Keller constantly chased high-risk bets, hunting for the big win that would solve all his problems. He was the perfect prey. Using his secret identity as Dante, Damon leveraged the network of informants he had cultivated over the years. He needed to plant a piece of information, an irresistible piece of bait so tempting that Keller could not let it pass. He contacted a small-time hustler known as Emmy the Mouth, a man famous for spreading rumors through the city's underworld, the same circles where Keller looked for poker games and where Sal Moretti found his clients. Damon, posing as Dante, met Jimmy in a bland, impersonal hotel room. He did not show his face, communicating through an instant messaging program on a laptop. He gave Jimmy a simple task: spread the rumor that the upcoming Belmont Stakes was fixed. A horse named King's Ransom, a long shot at 50-to-1 odds, was supposedly a sure thing. A disgruntled jockey was going to throw the race. To make it believable, Damon gave Jimmy a small cash advance with instructions to say it came from Dante's associates, who were fixing the bet. The money made the rumor feel real. "Make sure the right people hear about it," the synthesized voice ordered. "Especially anyone connected to Sal Moretti." Jimmy, eyes wide at the sight of the cash, nodded enthusiastically. He did not know who Dante was, and he was smart enough not to ask. Within a day, the rumor spread like wildfire through the city's gambling dens. As Damon monitored Keller's online activity, he watched him fall into the trap. Blue Line started asking about King's Ransom on the forum, first intrigued, then excited, and finally completely consumed by the idea. This was the masterstroke. Damon tracked Keller's GPS data on the night of the meeting. As expected, Keller drove to the laundry to meet Sal Moretti. But this time, Damon was listening. He had placed a hidden microphone in Keller's truck during an earlier surveillance. The audio was crystal clear. He heard Keller nervously trying to get more money. "I need another 20,000. I've got something locked in." "A horse. It's a sure thing." Moretti's voice, rough and gravelly, dripped with skepticism. "There's no such thing as a sure thing, Mikey. You know that. You're already into me for 30. "This is different," Keller insisted, his voice tight with desperation. "I can pay you double, triple. I just need the stake." There was a long pause. Damon held his breath. Moretti was a predator. He could smell desperation. It was his primary business indicator. "All right, Mikey," the loan shark finally sighed. 20,000, but the vig on this one is special. If you don't pay me back by next week, with the 60,000 you already owe, my guys will come collect your kneecaps. We clear?" "Clear. We're clear," Keller said, relief and terror mixing in his voice. Damon leaned back in his chair with a grim sense of satisfaction. The trap was set. Keller now had an impossible deadline and a crushing debt. He would bet everything on King's Ransom. Damon watched the Belmont Stakes on one of his monitors, while tracking Keller's location on another. Keller was at an off-track betting parlor, a place that smelled of cheap cigars and broken dreams. The race began. King's Ransom shot out of the gate, and for one thrilling moment even took the lead. Damon could almost feel Keller's heartbeat, the hope flooding through him. On the final turn, the horse stumbled, lost its stride, recovered. But the momentum was gone. It finished fifth, a crushing, unambiguous defeat. The hidden microphone in Keller's truck later captured his screams of helpless rage as he repeatedly punched the steering wheel. The spark had been lit. Officer Keller was no longer just a corrupt cop. He was a desperate, cornered animal. And cornered animals do stupid things. With Keller on the brink of financial ruin, Damon turned his attention to the second pillar of their corrupt partnership: Officer David Brennan. If Keller's weakness was an overwhelming need for money, Brennan's was an insatiable appetite for power. His entire world revolved around being the toughest, most respected, and most feared man in any room. To break him, Damon would not attack his money. He would attack his pride. He would orchestrate a public humiliation so profound that it would erode the very foundations of Brennan's identity. Damon's plan required a specific stage and a carefully chosen cast. The stage was the bustling open-air market held in the city's historic district, a place Brennan and Keller often patrolled on foot, enjoying the petty authority of shaking down vendors and intimidating teenagers. It was always crowded with tourists and locals. Most importantly, it was saturated with cell phone cameras. The lead actor would be one of Damon's protégés, a man named Leo. A former small-time con artist the FBI had recruited years earlier, Leo was a talented actor, capable of perfectly capturing a mix of belligerence and pathetic weakness. Damon briefed Leo in a discreet coffee shop far from the city center. "The target is Officer David Brennan," Damon explained, sliding a photo across the table. "He has a temper. He believes physical intimidation is the solution to everything. Your job is to provoke him into using excessive force, not just a little shove. Leo, I need him to lose control." He laid out the scenario. Leo would be selling counterfeit designer watches hidden under a blanket. When Brennan approached, Leo was to start out submissive, then turn insolent and defiant. His mission was to question Brennan's manhood, insult him, and put on a public show. The key, Damon emphasized, was to appear pathetic enough that Brennan's reaction would look completely disproportionate, to make the crowd sympathize with him. To ensure Leo's safety, Damon had 2 other undercover FBI agents in the crowd, ready to intervene if Brennan went too far. But the profile Damon had built suggested Brennan would not use his service weapon. He would use his fists. It was a more personal strategy. The crucial piece was the audience. Damon could not leave the coverage to chance. The day before the market, he sent an anonymous email tipping off a local activist group known for documenting police misconduct. The email simply said, "Keep your cameras on Officer Brennan at the downtown market tomorrow. He's been harassing vendors." He also tipped off a well-known local news blogger. He was setting the stage, making sure that when Brennan exploded, there would be multiple cameras from different angles ready to capture it. On the day of the market, Damon was a ghost in the crowd, dressed in tourist clothes that drew no attention, baseball cap, sunglasses, and a nondescript hoodie. He watched from a distance as the scene unfolded exactly as planned. Leo was brilliant. He played his role to perfection, raising his voice in feigned outrage when Brennan tried to confiscate the watches. "What? Need a new watch, big guy?" Leo sneered loud enough for those nearby to hear. "Can't afford a real one on a cop's salary?" Brennan's face tightened, and his neck flushed tomato red. "You've got a smart mouth," he growled, stepping closer. "You gonna teach me to shut up or what?" Leo shot back, puffing out his chest in a pathetic display of bravado. "You gonna hit me? Come on, tough guy. Show everybody how big and strong you are by picking on a watch vendor." That was the spark. Brennan exploded. He lunged at Leo, grabbed him by the throat, and slammed him into a fruit stand. Oranges and apples spilled across the ground. Brennan did not stop. He threw Leo to the pavement and delivered a hard, precise punch to the ribs. The crowd gasped. A woman screamed. And just as Damon had predicted, a dozen cell phones rose, their lenses trained on the uniformed officer beating an unarmed, helpless man. Keller tried to intervene, pulling on his partner's arm, but Brennan was blinded by rage. He threw another punch before the two undercover agents, posing as outraged citizens, stepped in shouting, "That's enough! Let him go!" Their presence, combined with the sea of cameras, finally cooled Brennan's fury. He stood up, breathing hard, his face twisted with anger as he realized what he had just done. He was surrounded, judged, and condemned by a jury of his peers. Damon melted into the crowd, his work done. That same night, the video went viral. It appeared on the local news blog and was shared thousands of times across social media with the hashtag #BadgeBully. The activist group demanded his immediate dismissal. The footage was brutal, unambiguous, and undeniable. Brennan was not a hero maintaining order. He was a thug with a badge who had lost control. The department could not cover it up. It was too public, too viral. Officer David Brennan was not fired, but the next day he was suspended indefinitely and assigned to desk duty pending investigation. His gun and badge were confiscated. For a man like Brennan, that was a fate worse than being fired. His power, his identity, and his pride had been stripped away in front of the entire city. The second pillar was crumbling. The consequences of the market incident were immediate and devastating. For Brennan and Keller, their partnership, once a source of mutual reinforcement and shared arrogance, began to rot with suspicion and recrimination. The invisible pressure Damon had applied had found the cracks in their foundation and was now prying them apart with brutal efficiency. They were no longer the untouchable kings of their domain. They were two compromised men sinking in quicksand, and they were beginning to claw at each other to stay afloat. Their first meeting after Brennan's suspension took place in a dive bar on the outskirts of the city, a place that reeked of stale beer and regret. Damon was not there, but he did not need to be. He had crystal-clear audio from the hidden microphone in Keller's SUV parked just outside. Brennan, dressed in civilian clothes, looked diminished. The absence of his uniform seemed to have physically shrunk him. He was sipping whiskey, his knuckles white around the glass. Keller slid into the booth across from him, his face marked by a new, frantic anxiety. "They're crucifying you online," Keller said in a low voice. "Every news outlet has the video. You think I don't know that?" Brennan snapped, his voice hoarse. "I had it under control. It was just some punk. Suddenly everybody's got a camera. It was a setup," Keller scoffed. "A setup? Who's setting you up, Dave? You lost your temper. You've been doing it for years. This time you got caught." The accusation hung in the air, thick and poisonous. For years, Keller had been the submissive follower, benefiting from Brennan's aggression. Now that Brennan was weakened, Keller saw him not as a protector, but as a liability. "I lost my temper because he pushed me," Brennan insisted, jaw tight. "And where were you? Just standing there doing nothing. You should have had my back. Push the crowd back." "Push the crowd back? That would have been filmed too," Keller shot back, raising his voice. "This is a mess, and now I'm being investigated because of it. Harlan called me this morning. He was asking questions about you, about our previous stops." Brennan's head snapped up, eyes narrowing. "What did you tell him?" "Nothing. I didn't tell him anything," Keller said, a defensive edge of fear in his voice. "But this is bad, really bad, and I've got my own problems." He ran a trembling hand through his hair. "I'm in a serious bind, Dave. A money bind." He did not mention the horse race or the loan shark by name, but the desperation in his voice was palpable. He was looking for an ally, for some sign of support from his partner. He found none. Brennan let out a bitter, humorless laugh. Money problems. That's your problem. I'm about to lose my job, my pension, and you're complaining about money. This isn't just complaining, Keller hissed, leaning forward. This is the kind of serious that can get you hurt. I need to get money fast. Brennan stared at him, his expression hardening from anger into cold suspicion. What are you talking about? What did you do? It doesn't matter what I did, Keller said evasively. The point is we're both in a mess. All of this started right after the café incident. First, I hit a streak of bad luck, and now you get set up in public. Don't you see it? It's him. Brennan's eyes widened slightly. The man in the red silk shirt. The man who had taken the scalding coffee without screaming, without even flinching. The man who had looked at them with eyes that showed no fear, only an unsettling calm. At the time, it had seemed strange, unnatural. That's crazy, Brennan said, but his voice lacked conviction. The idea was a seed of paranoia planted in fertile ground. Could one man have orchestrated all of this? It's him, Keller insisted. He looked at us like he knew something. Some rich guy new to the city with no fear of the police. Who is that guy? The question hung unanswered. Their common enemy should have united them, but instead it deepened the rift. Brennan saw Keller as weak and desperate, someone who could hurt him further. Keller saw Brennan as a reckless hothead, whose public meltdown had put them both under the microscope at the worst possible time. Trust had shattered, replaced by a frantic, selfish fear. They left the bar separately, each lost in his own whirlwind of paranoia, convinced the other would be the anchor that dragged him under. Damon, listening from afar, allowed himself a faint, cold smile. They were coming apart. All he had to do now was give them one final, desperate push. Desperation is a powerful catalyst. For Agents Brennan and Keller, now isolated and paranoid, it became the engine driving them toward a series of increasingly reckless decisions. Damon had orchestrated their personal crises with surgical precision. Now he would prepare the bait for the final trap, merging his personal quest for justice with the broader objectives of his official FBI mission. He would use their desperation to lure them directly into the path of his primary target, Marcus Hale. The plan began with another carefully planted rumor, this time aimed directly at Keller's precarious financial situation. Damon knew Sal Moretti was pressing him. The deadline to repay the $60,000 was approaching fast, and the threat of physical violence was very real. Keller was looking for a quick, high-risk, high-reward score, the kind of opportunity that only exists in the underworld. Damon would provide it. Once again, he turned to his informant, Jimmy the Mouth, this time to spread a different story. The rumor was that Marcus Hale's organization was looking for unofficial security for a major underground transaction. They needed a couple of men, preferably with law enforcement experience, to act as armed lookouts. The job was simple. Be present, look tough, and ensure a smooth exchange. The rumored payout was $100,000 in cash. No questions asked. The information was designed to be irresistible to someone like Keller. It offered a large sum of money, a potential solution to all his problems, and it played to his specific skills. Jimmy the Mouth was instructed to tip off one of Sal Moretti's enforcers. Damon knew the loan shark would see it as a possible way for Keller to settle his debt. It was good business for the criminal. Sure enough, within hours, Sal Moretti called a terrified Michael Keller. The audio from the bug was chillingly clear. "Mikey," Moretti said in his rough voice, "I might have a job for you, a way to make things right with me. A guy I know, a big fish named Hale, needs some muscle for one night. You interested?" Keller's answer was immediate, like a drowning man grabbing a lifeline. Yes, absolutely. Whatever it is. Keller knew he could not do it alone. He needed a partner. Someone with strength he could trust, or at least predict. Despite their recent estrangement, his first and only call was to Brennan. He found him at home, consumed by the humiliation of desk duty. "Dave, I've got something," Keller said in a conspiratorial whisper. "A job. A big one. 100,000 in cash." Brennan was immediately suspicious. "What kind of job?" "Private security. A one-night gig for a businessman named Hale. He's moving something valuable. He wants a couple of cops to make sure everything goes smoothly." "You mean a couple of suspended cops?" Brennan corrected bitterly. "No uniform, no badge, no authority. We'd just be hired thugs." "We'd be 100,000 richer," Keller argued, his voice pleading. "Think about it, Dave. With that money, we can hire the best lawyers. We can fight this suspension. We can get our lives back. This is our only shot." Brennan was silent for a long time. His pride was in tatters, his career in jeopardy. The offer was a lifeline, a chance to feel powerful again, even if it was on the wrong side of the law. More importantly, it was a chance to get the money he might need if he lost his pension. The system he had served was turning against him. Loyalty was a luxury he could no longer afford. "When and where?" Brennan finally asked in a grim voice. Damon, listening to the call, knew they had taken the bait. They believed they were accepting freelance work for a local gangster. They were so absorbed in their own problems that they never considered the possibility it was a trap. Their arrogance, the belief that they were smarter than any criminal, was leading them blindly into the center of a federal undercover operation. They were about to cross a line from which there would be no return. They were no longer simply corrupt local cops harassing civilians. They were about to become active participants in a federal crime, conspiring with the very man Damon had spent years trying to expose. The hunter had skillfully driven his prey into a much larger cage, and the door was about to slam shut. The location was a desolate, salt-stained warehouse at the far end of the city's port district. The air was thick with the smell of brine and decay, and the only light came from a few flickering sodium lamps that cast long, distorted shadows. It was the perfect anonymous setting for a high-stakes criminal transaction. For Damon, it was the final stage. Everything was meticulously prepared and controlled, down to the last detail. He sat in a tinted surveillance van, parked half a kilometer away, surrounded by a bank of high-resolution monitors. He had video feeds from a dozen hidden microcameras inside and outside the warehouse, and was listening to every sound through strategically placed audio sensors. His trap was ready. Now, he only had to wait for his targets to walk into it. Brennan and Keller arrived in Keller's truck and parked where they had been told. They got out, both dressed in dark clothing, their faces tight with a mixture of greed and nerves. They looked less like cops, and more like the thugs they were pretending to be. "This doesn't feel right," Brennan muttered as his eyes scanned the dark, empty lot. "Just stay calm," Keller whispered, trying to sound confident. "We go in, we stand there, we get paid, we leave. Simple." They walked toward the warehouse, hands near the weapons they carried. They had no idea that every step, every word, was being recorded with flawless clarity and image quality. Inside the warehouse, another undercover FBI agent posing as Hale's right-hand man, Mr. Sterling, was waiting. Mr. Sterling was a seasoned veteran of undercover work, a man who radiated a calm, professional menace. "You're late," he said coldly when Brennan and Keller entered the cavernous space. Crates were stacked against the walls, and a single bare bulb illuminated the center of the room. "We're here, aren't we?" Brennan growled, trying to assert some control. Mr. Sterling smiled with a serious, expressionless face. "Easy, officer. We're all professionals here." He pointed to a set of large sealed crates in the center of the room. "The merchandise is here. The buyers will arrive in 30 minutes. Your job is simple. Stay by the door. Don't let anyone in or out who isn't expected. If any other law enforcement shows up, you use your knowledge of police protocol to stall them. Tell them it's a false alarm. You're providing counter-surveillance and security. For this, Mr. Hale is prepared to pay each of you in cash. Are the terms clear?" In the van, Damon leaned toward the monitor. This was the critical moment. He needed their verbal confirmation, their explicit agreement to participate in the crime. Keller, eyes wide at the mention of the money, nodded immediately. "Yeah, clear." Brennan hesitated a fraction of a second longer. He was about to cross a clear, irreversible line. But then he thought of his suspension, of the mocking looks at the station, of the viral video of his humiliation. "Clear," he said in a firm voice. Mr. Sterling nodded. "Good. One more thing. I need to know you understand what you're protecting." He walked to one of the crates and forced it open with a crowbar. Inside, nestled in foam, were not unmarked electronics, but a dozen military-grade automatic rifles. "This is a federal matter," Mr. Sterling said, staring at them. "We need to know you're committed." The sight of the illegal weapons should have made them run. It was the difference between a shady security job and a long federal prison sentence for arms trafficking. Damon watched their faces on the monitor. He saw the flash of panic in Keller's eyes, the tightening of Brennan's jaw. This was their last chance to escape. Keller licked his dry lips. 60,000 in debt to a loan shark on one side, 50,000 in profit on the other. For him, the choice was simple. He gave a sharp nod. Brennan looked at the rifles, then at Keller, then at Mr. Sterling. His career was already in flames. What did it matter if he threw more fuel on the fire? He nodded as well. "We're committed," Brennan confirmed. In the van, Damon hit a key on his laptop. "I've got it," he said into his headset. "Explicit confirmation of conspiracy to facilitate illegal arms trafficking. Clean recording." He had everything. Their faces, their voices, their tacit agreement to commit a serious felony. He had led them from a simple act of racist harassment into the heart of a federal crime. And they, driven by their own greed and corruption, had walked every step of the way. He keyed his radio. "All teams, this is Cross. The package is ready. Execute." The trap was not merely set. It had been sprung. Brennan and Keller were caught in the center. The world outside the warehouse exploded into action. The silence of the port was shattered by the sudden synchronized roar of multiple engines. Tires screeched on asphalt. Powerful floodlights mounted on armored vehicles flared to life, bathing the entire area in blinding artificial light and erasing the shadows. The wail of sirens tore through the night. It was not one or two patrol cars. It was a full-scale federal assault team from the FBI. "Nobody move! Hands up!" The voice, amplified by a megaphone, was a thunderous, undeniable command. Inside the warehouse, Brennan and Keller froze, feeling the blood drain from their faces. This was not a local police raid. This was something entirely different, something far larger and more terrifying than they had ever imagined. Their instincts, honed by years of police service, screamed that this was a coordinated, professional takedown. Mr. Sterling, the undercover agent, raised his hands with a theatrical expression of surprise. Brennan and Keller, caught between their training and their crime, hesitated for a fatal second before slowly raising their hands. The massive metal doors of the warehouse slammed open, and a dozen agents in full tactical gear stormed in. Weapons raised, red laser sights dancing like fireflies across their chests. "On your knees, now!" one of the team leaders roared. The overwhelming force of the entry left no room for argument or resistance. Brennan and Keller dropped to their knees, feeling the rough concrete dig into their skin. They were stunned, trying to process the catastrophic turn of events. This was supposed to be their way out, their big score. Instead, it was the end of everything. Plastic zip ties were tightened around their wrists with brutal efficiency. They were searched, their personal weapons confiscated, and forced to lie face down on the cold, dusty floor. The professional silence of the FBI team was more unsettling than any shouting. Every agent moved with purpose, securing the weapons, detaining Mr. Sterling, sweeping the perimeter. For Brennan and Keller, the world had shrunk to the patch of concrete in front of them and the crushing weight of their own monumental mistake. Then, amid the cacophony of radios and the scrape of boots, they heard other footsteps approaching. Calm, measured, unhurried. The footsteps stopped a few meters from where they lay. "Get them up," ordered a soft, familiar voice. Two agents hauled Brennan and Keller to their feet and pushed them against a stack of crates. They blinked against the intense light, their eyes struggling to adjust from the darkness. And then they saw him. He stood in the center of the room, flanked by two other agents. He was not wearing the crimson silk shirt or a tailored suit. He wore black tactical pants and a navy blue jacket with bold yellow letters stamped across the back. FBI. It was him, the man from the café, Damon Cross. The recognition hit them like a physical blow. They gaped, their faces draining of color, expressions of pure shock rendering them speechless. The victim they had randomly chosen, the man they had despised, humiliated, and assaulted without a second thought, now stood before them as the architect of their total ruin. Every stroke of bad luck, every pressure, every unfortunate coincidence of the past weeks suddenly snapped into terrifying focus. It had not been a setup. It had been a masterful act of vengeance. Damon walked slowly toward them, his expression unreadable, his gaze as cold and serene as it had been in the café. He stopped right in front of them, close enough for them to see the federal agent's badge clipped to his belt. He looked at Brennan's stunned face, then at Keller's, which was trembling. The cocky, arrogant thugs were gone, replaced by two broken, terrified men who finally understood the magnitude of their mistake. "You know," Damon said, his voice barely audible, yet cutting through the noise of the raid like a razor. "All you had to do was leave me alone, enjoy your coffee. But you couldn't, could you?" He shook his head slowly, a flicker of something that might have been pity, or perhaps simple contempt, in his eyes. "You picked the wrong man to pour coffee on." He turned to one of the assault team leaders. "They're all yours. Read them their rights. I want them prosecuted federally." As the agents began to lead them away, Keller looked back over his shoulder, his face contorted with disbelief and horror. Who are you?" he stammered. Damon held his gaze for the last time. "I'm the guy in the red silk shirt," he said, "and you're under arrest." The interrogation rooms at the FBI field office were designed as monuments to absolute neutrality. The walls were a flat gray that absorbed sound. The furniture consisted of a single steel table bolted to the floor and 3 hard chairs. There were no windows, no clocks, no distractions. It was a sensory deprivation chamber built to dismantle a man, to strip away his defenses until only the truth remained. In that sterile box sat Michael Keller, hands cuffed to a bar on the table, his spirit completely shattered. The door opened, and Damon Cross entered. He carried no files, no notepad, only a paper cup of coffee. He set the cup on the table, just out of Keller's reach, and sat across from him. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the small room, a cruel, deliberate echo of the moment that had started it all. Keller flinched at the smell, refusing to look at Damon. "I want a lawyer," he muttered in a dull voice. "You'll get one," Damon said calmly. After we talk. You waived your right to have one present when you started answering the arresting agent's questions, remember? You were very cooperative, trying to cut a deal before your partner did. Damon had them in separate rooms, letting their paranoia and survival instincts do the work for him. Keller wilted. He had indeed started talking, trying to blame everything on Brennan. "This is entrapment," Keller said, pronouncing the word with a weak, rehearsed tone. Damon took a slow sip of his coffee. Entrapment is when a government agent induces a person to commit a crime they otherwise would not have committed. Let's review, shall we, Michael? Damon's voice was patient, like a teacher explaining a simple concept to a difficult student. Did I force you to develop a gambling addiction? Did I put a gun to your head and make you borrow money from a loan shark? No. All of that was on you. Keller remained silent, staring at the table. Did I tell you to be a racist thug? Damon continued, hardening his voice slightly. Did I order you and your partner to assault a man in a public café for the crime of living in a nice neighborhood? No. That was your choice. Your character. He leaned forward. All I did was give you opportunities. Opportunities to show who you really are. And you never disappointed me. Damon stood and began to walk slowly behind Keller's chair. Let's talk about the horse. King's ransom. You thought you had the perfect solution, didn't you? A cure-all for all your problems. But that tip wasn't for you, Michael. It was a test of your greed, of your desperation. And you failed spectacularly. Keller's shoulders slumped. And Brennan, Damon continued in a low, measured voice. His test was a test of pride. I knew he couldn't resist the chance to prove how tough he was, especially when someone he considered inferior challenged him. All it took was one actor and a few cell phone cameras to end his career, because his rage was always lurking, waiting for an excuse. He stopped pacing and leaned down, his mouth close to Keller's ear. You see, your greatest weakness wasn't the gambling or the anger. It was your arrogance. The two of you walked around this city like gods, believing your badges made you immune to consequences. Not for a single moment did you stop to consider that the man you were harassing, the man you poured coffee on, might be something other than what you saw. He returned to his seat and looked Keller straight in the eyes. You thought you were predators, but you were just clumsy, predictable animals walking into a trap I had set from the very beginning. Every step you took, you thought was your own idea. The job with Hale, the meeting at the warehouse. You thought you were taking control of your lives. But you were only following a script I had written for you. Keller finally looked up, his eyes shining with tears of rage and despair he had not shed. Why? He asked in a broken voice. Why go to all this trouble? Damon finished his coffee and set the empty cup on the table. He leaned in and lowered his voice to an icy whisper. Because you lived in a world without consequences, and I thought it was time you experienced some. You and Brennan are going to be convicted of federal arms trafficking. You'll be lucky if you see daylight in 20 years. Your partner is in the other room telling his lawyer this was all your idea. Your pathetic partnership is over. Your careers are over. Your lives as you knew them are over. Damon stood. And it all started because you couldn't stand the sight of a black man in a red silk shirt drinking a cup of coffee. Think about that while you wait for your lawyer. He walked to the door, leaving Keller alone in the gray, silent room, with nothing but the scent of coffee and the overwhelming weight of his own ruin. The city moved on, as cities always do. The headlines about the two disgraced and convicted federal officers faded, replaced by new scandals, new triumphs, new tragedies. The names of Brennan and Keller became a footnote, a cautionary tale whispered in the station locker rooms, a case study for ambitious prosecutors. For the world, the story was over. For Damon Cross, the quiet work of restoration had only just begun. He stood in his apartment, a modest, uncluttered space, mayhem of the city, a world away from the opulent safe house he had inhabited as Dante. The late-day sun poured through the large window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. The FBI's operation against Marcus Hale had been a complete success. The data from the hard drive, combined with the evidence from the undercover warehouse operation, had allowed them to dismantle his entire international network. Hale was in federal custody, awaiting a trial he could not win. The mission was officially over. A commendation awaited Damon at headquarters. He walked to his closet and opened the door. Hanging alone, clean and pressed, was a new crimson silk shirt, identical to the one that had been ruined. He had bought it the previous week. He did not know why. It was not a trophy. It felt more like a reminder of the spark, the initial catalyst. He ran his hand over the soft, cool fabric. He had won in every conceivable way. He had achieved a total and absolute victory. He had protected his mission, dismantled a major criminal organization, and delivered meticulous, devastating personal justice to the two men who had harmed him. They would spend the best years of their lives in a federal prison, forgotten and powerless. Yet there was no euphoria, no triumphant surge of satisfaction. Only a deep, oppressive silence remained. He had used the vast resources of the United States government, his formidable intellect, and a cold capacity for calculation to completely destroy two men. They were corrupt, racist, and violent. And the world was undoubtedly a better place without them wearing badges. But he had peered into the abyss of their lives, used their fears and weaknesses against them, and manipulated them like puppets. He had wielded his power with the precision of a surgeon and the morality of an executioner. The question that hung in the quiet of his apartment was not whether he had been right, but what the price of being right had been. He had maintained control, never once allowing anger to drive him. Every move had been deliberate, a cold means to a justified end. But to achieve it, he had drawn on a part of himself as ruthless and relentless as the men he had hunted. Justice had been served, but it was a cold dish that left a hollow feeling that had nothing to do with victory. He had proven that power, when misused by the arrogant, becomes its own undoing. And he had reminded himself that the true test of power lies not in its application, but in its restraint. For now, in the quiet sunlight of his apartment, that knowledge would have to be enough. What do you believe is the true meaning of justice? Is it what the law dictates, or is it what a person feels they deserve? Share your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for joining us on this journey.